The Sterling Foundation Gala filled the top floor of a Manhattan hotel with crystal glasses and men in expensive suits talking about loyalty. Camille Sterling sat at the center table with the stillness of a woman who had long since stopped being surprised by people. One of the men at the table was speaking about family and commitment. Camille knew him. 3 months ago, he had left his wife of 14 years. She let him finish. Then she set down her glass. All men are the same. They're only kind until kindness starts to cost them something. No one at the table responded. The server refilling her glass did. Jalen Mercer, 35, working his third event shift that week to cover rent, looked up and said without hesitation, "No, you just remember the ones who left." The room went quiet. Camille turned and looked at him. He didn't flinch. He hadn't said it to impress her. He said it because he knew exactly what it felt like to be left, and because he had stayed anyway. If this is the kind of story that makes you stop and think you're in the right place, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We put out new stories every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Jalen Mercer woke up at 5:15 every morning without an alarm. Not because he was disciplined in the way people who had choices were disciplined, but because Lila's school bus came at 7:40 and there was no backup plan. There had never been a backup plan. Their apartment in Brooklyn was small enough that he could hear her breathing through the wall at night. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen window that looked out onto a fire escape where he sometimes stood with his coffee before the city got loud. The radiator clanked every morning like it was reminding him it was still there. He found that comforting. Lila was 6. She had her father's eyes and her own opinions about everything, which shoes she would and would not wear, which breakfast foods were acceptable on which days, and whether the clouds outside looked like animals or something else entirely. She had been forming opinions since she could talk, and Jalen had learned early that the fastest way to start the morning wrong was to dismiss one of them. Renee had left before Lila turned 1. She hadn't left because something dramatic happened. She left because she had looked at the shape of the life ahead of her and decided it wasn't the shape she wanted. Jalen hadn't chased her. He hadn't tried to change her mind. He had stood in the doorway of Lila's room that night, watching his daughter sleep, and made a decision that was less of a choice and more of a simple fact: he was staying. He didn't talk about Renee often. When Lila asked, and she did sometimes in the careful way children ask things they already sense are complicated, Jalen told her the truth in the simplest possible version of it. That her mother had chosen a different path, that it wasn't about Lila, that some people weren't built for staying and that didn't make them evil, it just made them gone. He never told Lila to be angry. He never told her to forgive. He told her that people make choices, and the choices tell you who they are, and that was enough. During the day, he worked maintenance at the East Side Community Center, fixing what was broken, keeping things running, knowing the name of every family that came through the door. In the evenings, 3 or 4 times a week, he picked up server shifts at private events. He wore a white shirt and black pants and carried trays and refilled glasses for people who never learned his name. He didn't mind. The money was real, and real was what he needed. He had no savings to speak of. His car broke down with enough regularity that he had stopped being surprised by it. Every month had at least one moment where he looked at his account balance and did the math twice, hoping the second calculation would be different. It never was. But he had never missed a school pickup. He had never sent Lila to bed without a meal. He had never made her feel like a problem he was solving. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. Camille Sterling had been building Sterling Dynamics for 11 years, and she ran it the way she ran everything, with complete control and zero tolerance for the gap between what people promised and what they delivered. She had grown up watching that gap destroy her family. When she was 16, her father embezzled from his own company, then disappeared before anyone could ask him why. He left behind debts, a humiliated wife, and 2 children who had to learn very quickly that the world didn't extend sympathy to people whose father was a fraud. A few years later, her mother remarried a man who was warm and considerate in public and corrosive in private. The kind of man who wore kindness like a costume and took it off the moment the door closed. Camille had not formed her worldview in a single moment. She had built it over years, the way you build anything that's meant to hold weight. Carefully, with evidence testing each beam before she put her full trust in it. She had dated men who were charming until they weren't. She had worked with partners who were committed until the margins got thin. She had watched colleagues, friends, and strangers perform generosity in public and exercise something else entirely in private. What she believed was not bitterness. It was, in her estimation, simply accuracy. So when she sat at the Sterling Foundation gala table and listened to a man lecture about family loyalty 3 months after leaving his wife, she didn't raise her voice or make a scene. She simply said what she had long since concluded was true. What she had not anticipated was anyone saying she was wrong. After the room settled, Camille studied the man standing next to her table with the kind of attention she usually reserved for quarterly reports. He was calm, in a way that had nothing to do with composure being performed for an audience. He held the bottle at a neutral angle and looked at her without apology or aggression, as if he had said something obvious and was simply waiting to see what she did with it. "You're a server at a fundraiser," Camille said. "What exactly are you basing that on?" "I was left too," Jalen said. "My daughter's mother walked out when she was less than a year old. I didn't decide that meant every woman was the same." "That's a different situation." "The logic is identical." Someone at the table shifted uncomfortably. Camille ignored them. "You stayed," she said. "You want credit for that?" "I don't want credit for anything," Jalen said. "I stayed because my daughter needed someone who wouldn't leave. That's not heroic. That's just what you do when you're the parent." "Most people don't. Most people you've been paying attention to." Camille looked at him for a long moment. He didn't fill the silence. She found that interesting. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jalen Mercer." She nodded once, the way she did when she filed something away. Then she picked up her glass and turned back to the table. The conversation, as far as the room was concerned, was over. But something in the exchange had not closed. She found him at the end of the evening near the service exit, folding cloth napkins into a stack with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. She held out a business card. "Sterling Foundation runs a program called Harbor Initiative," she said. "We support low-income single-parent households in Brooklyn. We're looking for a community consultant for a 6-week period. Someone who actually knows what those families look like from the inside." Jalen looked at the card but didn't take it yet. "And you thought of me?" he said. "Because of what I said?" "Because of what I want to test," Camille said. "You made a claim tonight. I have a different view. I want to see whose holds up." He understood immediately. She wasn't offering an opportunity out of goodwill. She was constructing a controlled experiment, and he was the variable. If he turned out to be like everyone else, if proximity to money and influence shifted his behavior the way she believed it always did, she would have her confirmation. If he didn't, she had agreed to say so publicly. It was arrogant. It was also, he had to admit, honest about what it was. "What does the role actually involve?" he asked. She told him. Community outreach, family intake assessments, recommendations for how the program could better meet the real needs of the people it was trying to serve. He thought about the families he saw every week at the community center. Single mothers working double shifts, fathers who couldn't afford childcare and lost jobs because of it, kids who went home to empty apartments every afternoon because there was no other option. Harbor Initiative, if it was designed well, could change some of that. "I'll do it," he said. "One condition." She waited. "You come to the community center. You meet the families yourself. You don't run this from a conference room reading reports." She hadn't expected a condition. That was clear from the brief pause before she answered. "Fine," Camille said. He took the card. Mrs. Teresa Delgado lived 2 floors down and had known Jalen since the week he moved in. She was in her late 60s, moved slowly and talked fast, and had an opinion about everything from the weather to the current state of Jalen's refrigerator. She watched Lila on the evenings he worked and accepted payment in the form of conversation and the occasional baked good, which Jalen had learned to produce at an acceptable level out of sheer necessity. The morning after the gala, he stopped by her door on his way out. "You look like something happened," she said immediately. "Got offered a consulting job." "By who?" "Camille Sterling." She looked at him over her glasses. "The tech CEO?" "Yes." "Why?" He gave her the short version. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual. "She wants to prove something to herself," Mrs. Delgado said when he was done, "and she picked you to prove it with." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "The program could help people like us," he said. She nodded slowly. "You be careful," she said, "not of her. Of what happens when you start hoping someone's going to see things differently and they don't." He said he understood. He tucked the warning somewhere careful in his mind, the kind of place where he kept things that would matter later. The first Monday, Camille arrived at the Eastside Community Center 12 minutes early in a car that cost more than the annual budget of the center's after-school program. She wore a coat that was clearly not designed for a building where the lobby heater ran inconsistently. She stood at the front desk with the posture of someone accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room. Jalen walked her through the intake area, the community kitchen, the childcare room where 4 children sat in a circle while a volunteer read to them. He introduced her to the staff by name and let them tell her what they needed in their own words. He didn't translate or summarize, he just stood back and let her hear it directly. She took notes. She asked sharp questions. She absorbed information with the efficiency of someone who processed data for a living. What she was not yet doing was listening in the way that required her to set down the notebook. Jalen noticed. He didn't say anything yet. The 6 weeks had barely started. In the car back to Sterling Dynamics that evening, Camille sat with her notes and looked out the window at the Brooklyn streets scrolling past. She thought about a father named Marcus who worked the night shift at a warehouse and slept 4 hours a day so he could pick his son up from school himself. She had asked him if the program's hours aligned with his schedule. He had said with complete simplicity that he adjusted his schedule to align with his son. She had written that down. Then she had looked at what she had written and sat with it for a long moment. It didn't change anything. One person wasn't evidence of a pattern, but she had written it down. On the drive home that same evening, Jalen stopped at the grocery store and spent 12 minutes in the cereal aisle, calculating which combination of items fit within what he had left until Friday. He picked up Lila from Mrs. Delgado, listened to a full account of everything Lila had done and said and thought that afternoon, said goodnight to both of them, and made dinner. After Lila went to sleep, he sat at the kitchen table with the Harbor Initiative intake documents Camille had given him and started working through them. The questions were good, but they were built for people whose problems fit into categories. Most of the families he knew didn't fit into categories. They had problems that compounded each other in ways that didn't show up in checkboxes. He started writing his own notes in the margins. He didn't know yet if anyone would listen, but he wrote them anyway. The first person to confirm Camille's worldview was a volunteer named Derek. He showed up the second week of the program with a professional camera, a curated wardrobe, and the specific enthusiasm of someone who had already decided what the experience was going to look like on his social media page. He photographed the families without asking. He rearranged chairs so the light hit better. He referred to the children as "these incredible kids," in a way that made it clear he was rehearsing a caption. When Camille informed him that he would not be featured in the Foundation's promotional video, Derek gathered his camera bag and left before the afternoon session ended. Camille said nothing to Jalen. She didn't need to. She simply made a note. But the same week, a security guard named Frank, 61 years old, walked with a slight limp and had worked the center's front desk for 9 years, stayed 2 hours past the end of his shift every Tuesday and Thursday. Not to be recognized, not because it was in his contract. He stayed because 3 of the mothers in the program lived 6 blocks away, and the walk was safer with someone beside them, and he was someone who could do that. Jalen didn't point Frank out. He let Camille notice him on her own. She did on a Thursday evening when she was leaving late and saw Frank walking slowly alongside a woman with a stroller, listening to her talk, asking nothing in return. She sat in her car for a moment before the driver pulled away. She did not update her conclusion, but she kept the image somewhere she couldn't immediately sort away. 3 weeks in, a man named Roy missed his third consecutive training session. Roy was 38, recently laid off, enrolled in the workforce development component of Harbor Initiative. His attendance record looked like the profile of someone who didn't take the opportunity seriously. Camille flagged it in the weekly review. If participants aren't meeting basic attendance requirements, we need to revisit our intake criteria. We may be accepting people who aren't ready to commit. Jalen was quiet for a moment. Can I show you something before we make that call? The next morning, he took her to the pediatric clinic 3 blocks from the center. Roy was already there when they arrived, sitting in a plastic chair in the waiting room, his 8-year-old son beside him, the boy's hands wrapped in the kind of careful bandages that said this was a regular visit, not an emergency. Roy had a folder on his lap. The folder had tabs. He managed his son's chronic condition with the organizational precision of someone who had learned over years that no one else was going to do it if he didn't. His training sessions conflicted with the standing Tuesday appointment. He hadn't mentioned it because he didn't want to seem like he was asking for special treatment. On the drive back, Camille looked out the window for a long time. "He should have said something," she said finally. "He didn't think he was allowed to," Jalen said. "He's been told his whole life that needing accommodation means he's the problem." She didn't respond, but when she got back to the office, she revised the attendance policy to allow for medical exemptions with documentation. She asked the front desk coordinator to contact each participant individually and walk them through the updated guidelines. Roy came to Jalen 2 days later and mentioned it quietly without making it a moment. Jalen just nodded and said the policy made sense. He didn't tell Roy who had changed it, but he noted that Camille had done something that cost her nothing except the admission that a small assumption had been wrong. That was not nothing. The midpoint came on a Tuesday in the 4th week without warning, the way the things that matter most usually do. Jalen had spent 3 weeks building a proposal, a partnership model that would connect single parents in the program with local businesses willing to offer flexible scheduling in exchange for a trained, vetted workforce. It was specific, it was practical, and it had come directly from listening to the families describe what they actually needed. Not childcare subsidies in the abstract, not job listings, a schedule that worked around school pickup. A manager who understood that a sick kid was not an absence of commitment. Camille had arranged for him to present it to the foundation's board that Tuesday afternoon. If it landed well, there was a staff position available, a real one, with a real salary. Enough that he could stop working 3 event shifts a week. Enough that he could stop doing math in the cereal aisle. He put on the only suit jacket he owned, the one he kept in the back of the closet for situations that required something he didn't usually have to be. At 2:15, his phone rang. It was the school. Lila had fallen on the playground. Mild injury, no cause for alarm, but she was in the nurse's office asking for her father, and the nurse's voice had the careful gentleness of someone talking about a child who had been crying for a while. He stood in the hallway outside the boardroom. Camille came out a moment later, reading the expression on his face before he said anything. "I can send my assistant," she said, "or Mrs. Delgado. The board won't hold the slot, Jalen. This is the meeting." He knew it was the meeting. He had known for 3 weeks that it was the meeting. He looked at her for a moment, not with hesitation, but with the quiet of someone who had already made the decision and was waiting for the words to catch up. "She doesn't need someone convenient," he said. "She needs to know I come when she's scared." He collected his notes from the table, set them in front of Camille, and walked out. Camille stood in the boardroom with his notes and presented the proposal herself. She filled in the gaps from memory and from the conversations she had sat through over the past 3 weeks without fully realizing she was absorbing them. The board approved a pilot. She accepted their congratulations and said the framework had been developed by the community consultant, and she gave his name clearly. Then she sat at the head of the table for a moment after everyone else left and tried to understand what she was feeling. She had watched a man walk away from the best professional opportunity he'd had in years to go sit with a 6-year-old who had scraped her knee. Without drama, without making sure anyone witnessed it, without extracting anything from the moment except the moment itself. That evening, she drove to his apartment to return his notes. The door was slightly open. She could hear them from the hallway. Lila was telling the story of what happened the fall. The sound it made the exact texture of her feelings during each stage of the experience for what was clearly not the first time. And Jalen was sitting on the kitchen floor with an ice pack resting against her knee, listening with his full attention, asking follow-up questions, responding to each detail as if it were new. There was no audience. There was no reason for it to be a performance. Camille stood in the hallway long enough to understand that it wasn't. She knocked. He looked up. She held out the folder and said the board had approved the pilot. He said he was glad. She said he should have been the one to present it. He said he would have been if the timing had been different. Neither of them said anything about the choice he had made. They both knew what it was. She left. In the elevator going down, she stood with something she couldn't immediately name, not admiration exactly, and not the simple discomfort of being proven wrong. Something more unsettling than either. The feeling of seeing something real and not knowing what to do with it. After that evening, she started coming to the community center on days she hadn't scheduled. She ate lunch at the long tables with the families. She helped pack food boxes on Wednesday afternoons. She let Lila, who had started appearing on Saturdays with Jalen, explain things to her with the patient authority of someone who knew the building better than she did. Lila had given her a name, Lady Dragon. When Camille asked why, Lila said it was because she looked scary, but she always helped people when she thought nobody was watching. Camille hadn't known she was doing that, but when she thought about it, she supposed she was. One afternoon, watching Lila carefully arrange the center's art supply shelf by color and size, Camille mentioned offhandedly that the Foundation's annual gala was coming up in a few weeks. She said it the way you mention something in passing without planning to. She told Lila it was in a big room with tall ceilings, the kind Lila would probably find interesting. Lila said she wanted to come. Jalen glanced at Camille. She said she would add them to the list. It was a small moment. She didn't think much about it at the time. For the first time in years, she was in a space she hadn't constructed. And she was finding against her expectations that she didn't want to leave it. Which was precisely when she started looking for reasons why she should. She brought it to Graham over dinner at his apartment on a Sunday evening. Graham was 42, her half-brother and the person who had known her longest. He was not someone who told her what she wanted to hear, which was why she came to him when she was confused and didn't want to admit it. She laid it out the way she laid everything out, factually, in order, with the relevant evidence presented, without apparent emotion. When Jalen declined the additional bonus compensation and asked that it be redirected to the center's childcare fund, she mentioned it in the same tone she used for everything else. Graham listened to all of it, then he was quiet for a moment. "Camille," he said, "you're not worried he's going to do something wrong." She waited. "You're worried he's not going to, and you don't know what to do with that." She started to object. He continued before she could. "I've watched you for 20 years. You know how to handle disappointment. You've built your whole life around being ready for it. What you don't have a system for is someone who just keeps being what they appear to be." He paused. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "I did the same thing after Dad left, built the same walls, kept looking for the cracks in everyone so I'd see it coming next time." He looked at his glass. "The walls work, but you end up defending an empty room." She drove home without saying much. In her apartment, clean, quiet, entirely under her control, she sat with what he had said. And she did what she always did when something didn't fit her framework. She looked for the flaw in the argument rather than the flaw in the framework. She told herself she was being careful. She told herself that trust built too quickly was just naivete in a flattering light. She began canceling the informal meetings. She routed all communications through her assistant. She kept showing up at the center because she had committed to the 6 weeks, but she put professional distance back into every interaction and maintained it with the precision of someone who had a lot of practice. Jalen noticed. He always noticed. One afternoon, after a meeting that Camille had kept strictly transactional, he stopped her at the door. "You don't have to trust me right away," he said, "but don't punish me for what someone else did." She said she didn't know what he meant. He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded once the way people do when they've said what needed to be said and don't need it confirmed. The event that broke everything came 3 days before the 6-week period ended. The Harbor Initiative Gala was the Foundation's largest fundraiser of the year. Jalen had proposed that the families in the program speak for themselves, not through curated testimonials, not through carefully edited video packages, but directly in their own words about their actual experiences. Not the presentable version, the real one. Camille had agreed. Then she had seen the dry run. A mother had talked about the week she couldn't make rent and lied to her daughter about why they were sleeping at her sister's house. A father had described feeling humiliated every time he walked into the program's intake office because the questions treated him like a case to be managed. A woman had said that the food boxes helped, but the condescension from some of the volunteers made her feel worse than being hungry. These were true. They were also, Camille decided, uncontrolled. She revised the plan. The families would be given structured frameworks, key messages, approved talking points. It would still be authentic, it would just be managed. Jalen walked into her office and sat down across from her desk. "You're doing it again," he said. "I'm protecting the program." "You're protecting the image of the program. Those are different things. Major donors don't write checks to organizations that criticize themselves publicly. Some of them do, the ones worth having." The argument went on for 20 minutes, and it was the sharpest exchange they'd had since the gala where they met. And then, in a moment that came from somewhere she hadn't guarded closely enough, she said what she said. That his identity as a devoted father was the only thing that made him feel like he had value. That she had sometimes wondered whether Renee left not because she was selfish, but because living with someone who turned every sacrifice into a standard was its own kind of suffocation. That maybe the people in his life kept falling short because the bar had been set somewhere no one could actually reach. The room went silent. Jalen didn't raise his voice. He sat for a moment without moving. Then he reached up, unclipped his consultant badge, and placed it on the desk between them. "I don't need you to believe all men are good," he said. "I just need you to stop treating me like I'm guaranteed to be bad." He stood up. "And don't come back into Lila's life if you're going to treat her trust the same way you treated this." He left. The door closed behind him with the quiet finality of something that closes completely. Camille sat in her office. Everything was where she had put it. Nothing had been taken from her. She had not been betrayed or deceived or abandoned. She had been the one who made someone leave. For the first time, she understood the difference. And it was worse. The gala was in 4 days, and Camille ran the preparation the way she ran everything that mattered, by starting earlier than necessary and controlling every variable she could reach. She confirmed the venue, the lighting, the donor seating chart, and the order of the program. She approved the centerpieces and rejected the first version of the printed materials because the font weight was wrong. She reviewed the sponsorship acknowledgments twice and sent 3 follow-up emails to the catering lead about dietary accommodations that had been logged in the system and then somehow not communicated to the kitchen. She was thorough because thoroughness was what she had instead of the other thing. On the 3rd day before the event, her assistant forwarded a message from 6 of the Harbor Initiative families. They had heard about the revised plan, the structured frameworks, the approved talking points. They were writing to say they would not be participating. The message was polite. It was also completely clear their stories had been edited into something they didn't recognize, and they would not stand on a stage and deliver someone else's version of their life. Camille read the message 3 times. Then she set her phone face down on her desk and looked at the wall for a long time. The night of the gala, Mrs. Delgado brought Lila. Lila was in a dark green dress and white shoes that she had clearly chosen herself. Mrs. Delgado walked beside her in her good coat, the one she saved for occasions, moving at her usual unhurried pace and taking in the room with the measured appreciation of someone who didn't impress easily. She had dressed up for this. That was its own kind of statement. Camille found them near the entrance. Lila saw her and walked over with the directness that had always been her defining characteristic. "Where's Dad?" she asked. Camille crouched down so she was at eye level. "He isn't coming tonight." "Why?" There were many ways to answer that question. Camille chose the one that was true. "Because I said something that hurt him," she said, "and it wasn't fair." Lila considered this with the gravity she brought to things that deserved it. Then she said in the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating something obvious, "Dad always shows up when people need him, but that doesn't mean people get to hurt him." Camille held the words for a moment. Not the way you hold something that surprises you, but the way you hold something you already knew and had been avoiding. "You're right," she said. "It doesn't." Lila nodded, satisfied, and went to stand with Mrs. Delgado near the appetizer table. Mrs. Delgado caught Camille's eye briefly over Lila's head. She didn't say anything. She just gave a small, deliberate nod, the kind that meant, "Now you know what to do." Camille stood behind the stage curtain with her prepared remarks in her hand. She had written them 2 days ago after the family's message, after Jalen had left after the long night in her apartment, when she sat with what Graham had said and still managed to spend most of the evening arguing against it in her own head. The remarks were good. They were clear and measured and made a compelling case for sustained philanthropic investment in single-parent household support structures. They were also, she understood now, exactly the wrong thing to say tonight. The MC introduced the foundation. The room settled. Camille walked out and stood at the podium and looked at the audience, donors, board members, community representatives, and somewhere near the back, 6 families who had chosen to come anyway, even though they had withdrawn from the program. She set the prepared remarks on the podium, then she moved them to the side. "1 year ago," she said, "I told a room full of people that all men are the same, that they're only kind until kindness costs them something." The room was quiet. "I said it because I had evidence, and I wasn't wrong about the evidence. I've watched people perform generosity until it became inconvenient. I've watched commitment last exactly as long as it was comfortable. I believed what I believed because I had built it from real things that had really happened." She paused. "What I have been doing for the past 6 weeks is trying to run a program for families I wasn't willing to actually listen to. I approved their participation in this event on the condition that their stories came through me first, that I got to decide which parts were safe to say out loud." She looked at the families near the back. "That's not support. That's a different kind of control with better branding." A few people in the audience shifted. A board member near the front frowned slightly. Camille continued. "There are people in this room tonight who agreed to share their experiences with all of you. And then I handed them a script and asked them to share my version of their experiences instead. They said no. They were right to say no." She stepped away from the podium. "So I'm going to step back and let them say what they actually came here to say, without edits, without a framework, without someone standing between them and this room deciding what's too much." She picked up the microphone from its stand, walked to the edge of the stage, and held it out toward the seats where the families were sitting. There was a long pause. Then a woman named Patricia stood up. She was 34. 2 kids had been in the program for 4 months. She walked to the front of the room and took the microphone. What followed was not polished. Patricia spoke about the intake process and how the forms made her feel like a number. She talked about the week she had to choose between her phone bill and her daughter's field trip, and how she had cried in a bathroom stall at work afterward so her daughter wouldn't see. She talked about what it felt like when the program connected her with a job that actually aligned with school pickup hours, not the emotion of it, but the practical reality, the specific relief of one problem becoming smaller. She cried once, briefly, and didn't apologize for it. After her, a man named David spoke, then a woman named Carmen. Each of them said something different. Each of them said something true. A couple of the things they said were critical of how the program had been run in its early weeks. One donor in the third row looked uncomfortable. Camille didn't look away from the speakers. When it was over, the room was different from how it had been before. Not warmer exactly, but more honest. The way a room feels when the thing being discussed is the actual thing and not a curated version of it. The next morning, Camille drove to the Eastside Community Center before it opened. Jalen was in the back room restocking supplies from a delivery moving boxes with the steady efficiency of someone who had been doing physical work his whole life and saw no reason to make it look like more than it was. He heard her come in and turned around. He looked at her without surprise. She didn't bring anything with her. No contract revision, no formal offer, no strategic repositioning. She stood in the doorway of the supply room and said what she had come to say. "I used the worst things that ever happened to me as a weapon against someone who had never done anything to deserve it," she said. "I turned the most important thing in your life into evidence for an argument. What I said about Renee, about your value as a person, I said it to win. It wasn't true, and I knew it wasn't true when I said it." Jalen set down the box he was holding. "The way I treated you was a way of protecting myself from the possibility that I might be wrong about everything I decided to believe. And the irony is that the person I chose to do that to was the only person in a long time who made me think I might actually be wrong." She stopped. She didn't add anything about wanting him back in the program. She didn't outline what she hoped the outcome of the conversation would be. She had made that mistake before, converting every interaction into a negotiation where she already knew what she wanted to leave with. Jalen was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I accept your apology." She hadn't been certain he would, and the relief that moved through her was sharper than she expected. "But I need time," he said. "An apology is the beginning of something, not the end of it. What matters is what you do the next time you're scared, and it would be easier to push someone out than to stay in the room." "I know," she said. "Then you know I'm not saying no. I'm saying not yet." She nodded. "That's fair." She left without asking for anything more. She didn't wait for Jalen to come back before she started making the changes that needed to be made. She restructured the Harbor Initiative Advisory Board to include 4 seats reserved for current and former program participants. She gave the community team direct authority over outreach decisions without requiring executive approval for each step. She hired a full-time family advocate whose entire job was to make sure the family's needs were guiding the program's direction and not the other way around. She stopped using personal hardship stories in donor materials without explicit written consent from the individuals involved. She also kept showing up at the center every week. She packed food boxes and sat with families at the long tables and let Lila explain the organizational system of the toy shelf to her with extreme seriousness. She did it when Jalen was there and when he wasn't. She didn't do it to demonstrate anything. She did it because the work was real and because she had been wrong about thinking that staying in control was the same as doing something useful. Graham called her one evening during this period, checking in the way he occasionally did. She told him what she had changed. He listened and said simply, "Good. Keep going." It was enough. 3 months later, Jalen applied for the Director of Community Relations position when it was posted through the Foundation's standard hiring process. He went through the panel interview the same way every other candidate did. He was selected because his proposal was specific, his knowledge of the community was direct and verifiable, and the families in the program had worked with him long enough to trust him with decisions that affected their lives. Camille recused herself from the final selection panel. When he was appointed, she sent a one-line message through the staff system. "Congratulations, the role is yours, because you earned it." He replied, "I know. Thank you for making sure it worked that way." A year after the gala where they met, the Sterling Foundation held its annual fundraiser in the same hotel on the same floor in the same room. Harbor Initiative had helped 412 families access stable employment, subsidized childcare, and housing support over the preceding 12 months. The families who had spoken at last year's gala were invited back not to perform gratitude, but to sit at the donor tables if they chose, as people who had shaped what the program had become. Camille stood at the podium near the end of the program. "A year ago," she said, "I stood in a room like this one and told people that all men are the same, that kindness was always temporary, that people were only good until being good cost them something." She looked out at the room. Jalen was near the back with Lila, who had been allowed to stay up past her bedtime for the occasion and was taking the privilege seriously. "I said that like my personal experience was universal law. Like the specific people who had let me down were evidence about everyone." She paused. "They weren't. They were evidence about themselves, and I had been too afraid to make that distinction because making it would mean I had to start over. I'd have to look at each person in front of me and actually find out who they were instead of deciding in advance." She didn't call Jalen an exception. She had thought about that framing and set it aside, because calling someone an exception still meant the rule held it just meant you were making a special case, and special cases don't change the way you move through the world. "Nobody should be judged by what someone else did before them," she said. "The only thing we can actually know about a person is what they choose when the choice is hard and nobody's watching." After the program ended, Lila found her way to Camille's side. "Do you still think all men are the same?" she asked. Camille considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "No," she said. "Some people leave, some people stay. Some people are still figuring out how to be better than they used to be. You have to look at what each person actually does." Lila appeared to find this satisfactory. Jalen came to stand beside them. He looked at Camille with the quiet steadiness she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things he had made a decision about. "I told you that you were wrong," he said. "You did," she said. "It took me too long to admit it." She reached over and took his hand. He let her. The three of them walked out of the event together. Jalen had not become valuable because a CEO chose him. Camille had not been healed simply because a good man appeared. They had both learned slowly, at real cost, that the only way to know who someone is to stay long enough to watch them make a choice that matters. Jalen had known that for years. He had learned it standing in a doorway in Brooklyn, watching his daughter sleep, deciding without drama that he was not going anywhere. Camille had learned it later. The hard way, which was the only way she had ever learned anything that stayed. But she had learned it. And that, in the end, was the only answer that changed anything. There's a version of Camille in a lot of us, the part that decides in advance that protects itself by never fully arriving. And there's something worth holding on to in Jalen's example, that showing up quietly and without an audience is its own kind of answer to the world. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, because every week we bring you stories about the choices that define people when no one is watching. We'll see you in the next one.